We have the IEA coming out with all sorts of sort of forecasts about shutting down investment in oil production and the outlook in order to reach the sort of climate change targets. There's many headlines to pick out from last week on that, John. One that stands out to me amongst the many is the decision at ExxonMobil, where we saw this activist fund with only 0.02% of a stake in ExxonMobil, yet managing to get 2 seats on the board. How do you interpret that? What do you think this means for the wider industry as a whole?
Okay, good. We can break out each one of these things, Sean. IEA, ExxonMobil, Shell for the week, Chevron, the shareholders weighing in, but let's talk about ExxonMobil. Engine number 1 is the name of the activist group. As you suggested here, they didn't have a lot at play, but they have a loud voice. But the other interesting thing about it is that you have the major players like BlackRock suggesting the same. So they're not acting on their own, but they're kind of the front runner on this. But other major investment funds on Wall Street are saying to the major oil and gas companies in the United States, you kind of have to get into alignment with what the rest of the world is doing. I would suggest in particular the European IOCs, right? So ExxonMobil has been very slow to make this transition as the largest producer in the United States. There's no doubt about it. Chevron was one that moved more aggressively on that front. And you see now with the IEA suggesting that demand that was at 100 million barrels a day in the third quarter of 2019 is already reached its peak, suggesting that 74 million barrels by 2030, around that, and then 24 million barrels by 2050. What I found was interesting about this, Sean, is that there's alignment now between the International Renewable Energy Agency here in Abu Dhabi, which had a report out in March, mid-March, suggesting you need $131 trillion between now and 2050 to make the transition. And the numbers are almost exactly the same, suggesting that demand in 2050, according to IRENA, is going to be 25 million barrels a day. And now we see the IEA, which was founded, as you know, in 1974 to protect oil supplies because of the Arab embargo, suggesting that demand is going to drop to 24 million barrels a day. And we could have a half-hour discussion on all the other things they put in here in terms of hydrogen demand, renewable demand, and investment coming to the fore.
Sorry, do you think we will see resistance in the US? I mean, I remember a year ago, actually, we had Amos Hochstein on this channel, and actually he's going to be with us again this week as our halftime talk as the former chief Iran energy analyst for the US State Department. But in terms of his forecast that when we're looking to Biden administration, he was sort of putting it in the context that he would be the savior of the US oil majors because they couldn't find their own pathway to the transition, and that the Biden administration would be imposing that transition on them. Now we're seeing the Senate, the Republicans fight back a little bit, some declarations there. Do you think that there will be a pushback of strength against this in the US, body politic and industry, or will they just at this point accept this change?
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. So let's look at the politics that you were suggesting here. The Biden plan is $1.7 trillion for the infrastructure plan. He has it kind of framed as the American jobs plan. And then you saw the Republicans in negotiation this week bring that down to 928. So you do have a gap. So mind the gap. The thing that's dangerous about this, in my view, from the Republican Party, they're looking for pork barrel politics here. I worked in Washington for 5 years on Capitol Hill, and they're saying, okay, what would benefit my constituency, right? Each one of the senators or congressmen and women saying, okay, yes, we support this. So the roads, the bridges, the rail system needs to be modernized. But where we have the difference here, and that's the funding difference, is where Biden wants to take this in terms of, 500,000 charging stations for electric vehicles, right? New vehicle sales still of electric cars are rising at a very rapid pace, but they're minuscule according to the targets. And if you go back to the IEA report, if you go back to the IRENA report, Sean, it's suggesting that we need to be in the range of 80 to 100% of electric vehicle sales by 2050. there is this gap that exists in the market. So there's the aspirations of the Biden administration and the European Union for electric vehicle sales. The Biden administration is trying to put tax incentives and tax credits in to spur electric vehicle sales. And I have to say, I agree with Amos on this because they're trying to push the industry in the right direction. We also have to watch very carefully because the lease sales and the policy for oil and gas drilling is coming up under the Biden administration for review. That'll give us greater indication of what they're planning to do in the near future. I'm disappointed with the Republicans. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And the other thing I would add to this is that I look at Joe Biden as almost an FDR, right? 1933 to 39 with the New Deal. Biden sees he's a one-term president, I think partially because of age, although he's indicated he would probably like to run again. But he's trying to throw.
He couldn't signal this early that he's going to be one. Or
of course,
he would be a bit lamish, yeah.
Right, but he's going to give everything he's got to make his mark at least in one term. And I think this $6 trillion budget that he's putting forward for 2022 is an indication of that. He wants to put the infrastructure program in and then back it up with more pro-renewable transition policy for next year as well.
Last week, John, and for the previous number of weeks, one of the biggest issues weighing on the oil markets is the outlook for the Iran nuclear talks reviving, which are now 4 weeks, a month or so underway in Vienna. They're to go into yet another week next week as we get closer to the Iranian elections. They seem to be making very consistent progress without yet having the kind of white smoke of completion, but all things are looking like they're getting there. What are your thoughts on that and the consequence for energy markets?
Right. Well, a great point. This is something you and I have talked about offline. Like, how do you manage Iran coming back into the market when Saudi Arabia is trying to manage expectations within the OPEC apparatus itself and then the wider OPEC plus? It's kind of been, I said, the new sheriff in town. This is the job of 𝗪𝗪𝗪 bin Salman since he's taken over as Minister of Energy, trying to keep everybody corralled. And there are challenges from within, as you know, Sean. There's some major players. The UAE is one of them, would like to take its capacity from 3.5, 4 up to 5 by 2030. They see the transition here. I mean, the senior sources I've spoken to in the UAE say that there's a 20-year horizon where the demand does hold up, and then that's all bets are off because of the uncertainty and the transition.